very best to help destigmatize it. The word dementia describes a collection of symptoms caused by brain damage or brain disease. While Alzheimer's is by far the most common type, there are lots of different kinds of dementia, just as there are many varieties of cancer. And because the specific type can only be determined for certain through an autopsy, people with dementia will tell you that at the time of our diagnosis, we all hear from our doctors the word probably. You have dementia. It's probably Alzheimer's or vascular or Lewy body or some other variety such as FTD. And that word probably can be very complicated because it leaves one hanging in a suspense. Frontotemporal degeneration, FTD, causes a progressive, gradual decline in behavior, language, executive function, and movement, with long-term memory usually intact. And because it is far less common and less understood, FTD, which generally affects people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, is frequently misdiagnosed. At present, there is no cure for FTD. Although its progression varies by individual, FTD does result in inevitable decline, with an average life expectancy of 7 to 13 years after the onset of symptoms. Since I've been an outlier most of my life, I hope to be an outlier in longevity. Like others living with dementia, many days are a struggle, and while I might not show it, in the words of Christine Bryden, a remarkable woman living with FTD, I often feel like a swan, gliding above and paddling frantically beneath just to stay afloat. I have something called primary progressive aphasia, that is the loss of language. It is getting harder for me to speak and write, especially in the evening, in busy environments, in conversation, and when I'm feeling frustrated, hurried, or pressured. However, once I figure out what I want to communicate, and with the help of the Google Dictionary and spell check, and once I write it down, I can deliver my message with relative ease and confidence. As Emily likes to say, one day I can preach a kick-ass sermon, and the next day I can't put two sentences together. I've learned that language is a three-step process. We have to decide what we want to communicate, recall how to say or write it, and then we have to do it. And when you're struggling to think, speak, and write, the seeming process is exhausting. And by the time I get to the third step, I often want to give up, or the conversation has moved on. I'm coming to realize that with the exception of involuntary actions like breathing, nearly everything we do is a three-step dance. We have to decide what to do, how to do it, and then do it. And this process comes so naturally that we deceive ourselves into believing that we can do several things at once, like drive and listen to the radio, admire the view, talk on the phone, follow directions, and eat a sandwich. And I used to be like that. But brain scientists will tell you there really is no such thing as multitasking. We just do a lot of stuff really fast. And speaking of multitasking, please don't anybody text me during this speech, because it's popping up on my iPad and confusing me. People living with dementia can only do one thing at a time. And that becomes increasingly difficult as we desperately try to recall and execute the steps of the dance with as much grace as possible. I often get tentative and anxious. I'm afraid that I'll forget something important, not recognize someone I know, or that I will become overwhelmed by my environment. And I've learned that anxiety is an undercurrent of this disease. People with cognitive impairment often live on the edge of panic. But as I adjust to living with this condition and as we develop coping strategies, it's actually getting easier. For instance, I've curtailed my number of activities and conversations during the day. And thanks to speech therapy, I learned some descriptive workarounds for when I can't recall a word. With the help of a physical therapist, I've learned how to prevent falls. I've organized my closet into a fashionable capsule wardrobe so that I only see a limited number of items and they all go together. And yet I can still change my clothes 3 times in one morning trying to decide what white shirt to put on. When we go out to a restaurant, we try to look at the menu in advance so that by process of elimination, I can decide what I will eat. We get there, we ask for a quiet table, and Emily reminds me of what I decided to order. And recently, we made the decision to sell our dream home overlooking the lake for a quieter neighborhood closer to family and friends and support systems. Since my diagnosis, I've been asking myself a lot of questions. Like, where is the grace in all of this? What are the unexpected gifts? What is the wisdom of a life affected by dementia? And I'd like to share with you some of these life lessons. The first one is no longer the captain. One of the realities of dementia is that as it progresses, your world becomes smaller and your realm of decision-making more limited. While I'm still able to manage daily living, I'm no longer able to lead a large and complex cathedral. I'm still able to drive, but we've given up a car, and in due time, I know I will be giving up that source of independence. And while I want to stay home as long as possible, there might come a time when I will need a level of care or I become so isolated that I will have to move into assisted living. So while I'm no longer the captain, I'm also discovering freedom in not being in charge, relief in not having to make so many decisions, and joy as I watch others take the helm. Do you remember the 1990s movie Regarding Henry, starring Harrison Ford? It's about a New York lawyer who gets shot in the head, and it brings his career to a screeching halt and leaves him with both brain damage and the spirit of a child. That's how I feel most days. I'm in this aging adult body with a brain that is damaged and a spirit that is becoming younger, so that I often experience life through the eyes of a child. I ride my bike with new enthusiasm, sometimes pretending like I'm on a horse. I explore tidal basins and I look at art with the curiosity of a kid. I laugh at silly bathroom jokes. I cry at the drop of a dime. I sometimes want my teddy bear, and there are moments when I reach for Emily's hand or she takes mine, not like a spouse or a lover, but like a child with her parent. Zen Buddhism teaches us about the beginner's mind, a place with many possibilities. Rachel Carson once wrote, "A child's world is fresh and new and beautiful, full of wonder and excitement." And Jesus said, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to become like a child. Ambitions and aspirations. And the second half of life happens when, for various reasons, the contents of our identity containers are spilled out and refined. And the container, now worn, dirty, chipped, and perhaps even broken and reglued, is refilled. And now with all of its contradiction and paradox, its pain and joy, we hold our containers in what Rohr calls luminos gravitas, or a bright sadness. I realize that I'm falling upward into the fullness of life with dementia. I have no doubt that I'm losing the life I've always known, but I'm also certain that I'm finding a new one. When I deny the reality of my disease and grieve the lost aspects of my old identity, when I resist the emerging aspects of the new me, I get all tied up in knots. But when I accept what has died and let go of what has been lost and celebrate what is being reborn, when I try to love and care for the person that is emerging, I start discovering surprising gifts and strengths and a new kind of balance and wisdom and a new way of living in the world. I'm learning that Bobby McFerrin's 1988 #1 hit, "Don't Worry, Be Happy," actually teaches an important lesson about living with dementia. As he sings, "In every life we have some trouble. When you worry, you make it double." I'm discovering that since I can't return to the past, and since I can't predict or control the future, and it doesn't look real pretty at times, I have to live in the here and now. I try not to worry about tomorrow, because as we know, tomorrow will bring worries of its own. And when I live in the past, life is pretty good, except when it's not. As a pastor, I've taught that the cultivation of mindful living is essential for human well-being. I'm now learning firsthand that a regular daily routine and the intentional practice of mindful eating, physical and mental exercise, sleep, meditation, prayer, and stress reduction actually help to manage dementia. And moreover, neuroscientists are discovering that these mindfulness practices can really change the brain. Too many people with dementia just give up and think, "I can't do anything. It's all over." I thought that for a good while. And unfortunately, this attitude is reinforced by a world that approaches dementia from a deficit perspective, noting all that is lost and anticipating what is often called the long goodbye. That is not a helpful strategy. So I'm trying to approach dementia from an asset perspective, just the way we've tried to approach Cleveland, right? I'm going to do what I can do until I can't do it. And then I'm going to do something else. As I've witnessed in so many people, and I now see in my own life, there are amazing opportunities to be had on this journey if we are willing and allowed to claim them. Emily and I are really trying to turn our life with dementia into a pilgrimage and an adventure in learning and spiritual growth. I like to call it our own elder hostel. When we walked the Camino de Santiago in Spain 9 years ago, we learned that everyone walks at their own pace and experiences it differently. And the same is true for dementia. They say if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. So as we walk this new path, we're following the advice of the Sufi mystic and poet Rumi, who said, "Wherever you stand, be the soul of that place." We are determined to embrace the situation in which we find ourselves, seeking the good that it has to offer. So we've even turned my doctor appointments into afternoon dates. You know, people often say to me, "Tracy, you don't seem like you have dementia." And I bet some of you are thinking that right now. But what does that mean? That a person with dementia is wandering around a memory unit with cookie crumbs on her shirt, wearing adult diapers, holding a stuffed animal, staring into space, and maybe babbling or moaning. That's not me. Nor is it any of the other folks I've met who are living with early to mid-stage dementia. Some days I feel like my old self, and I question the diagnosis. But then something will happen. I might get disoriented in a building, or overwhelmed in a crowd, or frightened in an airport, or startled on a busy sidewalk. I might start stuttering or blurting out or even shouting out incorrect words or incomplete sentences as I try desperately to make myself understood. I might even go to speak and nothing comes out of my mouth. I might forget to brush my teeth or take a shower or take my medicine. I might become inundated and immobilized by choices and decisions, or forget how to do a simple task that I've done all my life. I might have a tantrum in public, or burst into tears for no good reason, or even help myself to food off a stranger's plate. Recently happened on an airplane. It was really embarrassing. These are the moments that remind me that, yes, I'm cognitively impaired. I've learned that denial is a common issue when it comes to dementia. Because it's such a devastating diagnosis, people want to offer comfort by saying things like, we all forget where we placed our keys, or we all can't recall our best friend's name. And I got to tell you, such well-intentioned remarks are neither comforting nor are they helpful, because they reinforce an unhealthy cycle of denial and doubt. I'm coming to conclude, and based on conversations with some of my new friends, that acceptance is one of the most difficult but critical aspects of living with cognitive impairment. Those of us with early to mid-stage dementia are not sitting in chairs lost in space. We're adapting to the best of our ability, believing that if we and those around us are honest about our reality, the truth will set us free to enjoy our life with it. You know, it's not surprising that people living with dementia and our spouses often go to the sidelines and eventually drop out of sight, crossing to the other side of life as we once knew it. And then, as the old saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. My mother sadly learned that once confined to a memory unit, friends and family didn't visit. They found it painful or scary, inconvenient. Maybe they thought it was contagious. As dementia runs its course, we often end up on walkers, in wheelchairs, and eventually confined to bed. And at the end stage, we become very reliant on the kindness of others, even strangers. So I'm making a list of the music and the films, the poetry, the food, the flowers, the clothing, the television shows, and the daily routines that I enjoy, so that when I'm not able to communicate, my caregivers will know my personal tastes, not theirs. Your doctors and your lawyers probably aren't going to tell you to do this, but I think what I call the playlist of my life is as important as my living will and my healthcare power of attorney. One of the messages I want to leave with you today is the importance of being with us until the end of life's journey. Dementia is a long, long road. When we can no longer attend community gatherings, the community needs to come to us. When we can no longer remember who we are, others become our memory. When we can no longer care for ourselves, spouses become lovers and children become companions in new ways. When our families get exhausted, friends and neighbors can offer respite. When we need assistance, caregivers must resist the temptation to infantilize us, but rather treat and see and respect us as mature adults. My last lesson is gratitude. While I would have never, ever, ever wished for this diagnosis, in a strange way, I am profoundly grateful. Dementia has opened up my world in ways beyond my imagination. It has helped me to see the preciousness and uncertainty of life. It has provided Emily and me with a new adventure in togetherness, maybe too much togetherness for her. And it's introduced us to new friends all over the world. It has forced me to slow down and smell the roses. It has humbled me. And it has called me to what others say might become the most important chapter of my ministry. You see, I've decided to view my dementia in a way similar to how the Dalai Lama refers to his exile, as an opportunity to get closer to life. Dementia is the 7th leading cause of death in the world, the foremost leading reason for disability and dependence among the elderly, and it is a growing public health crisis. Though not a normal part of aging, 1 in 3 people over the age of 85 and 1 in 10 over the age of 65 will have some form of dementia. And based on these statistics, in Cuyahoga County alone, there are probably more than 20,000 people living with this condition. Dementia doesn't discriminate, but access to quality care does, sometimes causing financial ruin for those affected by it. Frankly, I worry that as boomers start to age and dementia begins to accelerate at a more rapid pace, this condition could bankrupt Medicare and Medicaid. And in this political climate, I'm fearful that we'll start warehousing those who don't have family support systems, can't take care of themselves, and can't afford assisted living. Anticipating the growth in dementia as our population ages, cities around the nation and the globe, including Pittsburgh, Fort Worth, Louisville, Denver, and London, are becoming dementia-friendly communities. They are deliberately cultivating the ability of people living with dementia and their families to thrive and remain engaged in the community. According to the organization Dementia Friendly America, in dementia-friendly communities, banks and businesses, restaurants, and even taxi drivers learn how to accommodate customers who have cognitive impairment. Through generous family leave policies, employers support workers who are caregivers to someone living with dementia. First responders learn how to recognize the signs of dementia and act accordingly. In dementia-friendly communities, healthcare systems promote early detection and diagnosis, and faith communities intentionally welcome and make accommodations for those living with dementia. In dementia-friendly communities, local governments design and build housing and transportation and public spaces that will allow us to live independently. And community residents learn how to interact sensitively and create networks of support. And in dementia communities, residential care providers and community agencies offer a wide range of services that maximize independence and encourage ongoing community involvement. Anticipating what I believe is a public health tsunami in the making, I think that Greater Cleveland should join this movement. Building upon our existing assets and coupled with our affordable cost and high quality of life, perhaps becoming a dementia-friendly community could actually result in further economic development and population growth. And moreover, it's the right and the just thing to do. One of the challenges for people living with dementia is that we lose the ability to tell our own stories and advocate on our own behalf. That is why, for as long as I am able, I am determined to tell my story of dementia from the inside out. And I thank you all for listening.
Today, we are listening to a forum with the very Reverend Tracy Lind. For those of you who are listening, she just received a standing ovation. We're about to begin the audience Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, or those of you joining us via radio broadcast or live stream. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will try to work it into the program. Holding the microphones today are Content Coordinator Bliss Davis and Marketing and Outreach Coordinator Julia Wong. May we have the first question, please?
Thank you for your grace, your dignity, your courage, and your candor. You've lifted us, but that's what you do. You talked about well-intended people saying things that don't lift you. Help us bridge how to talk to people who have various afflictions from your perspective and your background as a pastor. How do we help people and not give unintended consequences, but lift them, but be able to share how we're feeling too?
Thanks, Beth, and thank you for your friendship. I think the first thing is to, when somebody tells you what's going on in their life, to acknowledge it, to not try to dismiss it, to not say it's not real or you sure it's not your imagination. And then I think to ask the person, how can I be most supportive? What do you, to ask them to tell you what their struggle is like and what it's about and what's hard and what's easy. When it comes to supporting the spouses and care partners of people living with dementia, it's also important to say, if they can't answer, how can I help, is to say, I can do this for you, would that be helpful? But I think what I'm really trying to say is, if I tell you my truth, to not negate it and to enter into the conversation with me. I think sometimes people with dementia, we are like a mirror for people because it's so frightening for everybody. We don't want to acknowledge its truth.
Hi, thank you very much, Reverend Lynn. This was an amazing story for all of us to hear. And I know we have, I do government relations, and I know we have some policymakers that are here in the audience. And for decades, we've been calling it the decade of the brain. And because everybody really does want to figure out a good way to solve this and follow the same success we have had with AIDS and other types of diseases. Are you telling your story to policymakers and others, and what kind of, how can we help you get this word out about how to address this from the inside out, the way you just told your story?
Well, thank you. Emily and I made a decision. We would go where we were invited and do what we were asked to do. So I'm willing to speak in as many places as I can. And most of my speaking has been in the context of the faith community, because that's been my access. But I am more than delighted to speak with policymakers, with medical schools, with doctors. I think invite me and I will do my best to show up. There's also a particular piece of legislation called, is it the HOPE? The BOLD Act. The BOLD Act, and I can't remember what it means right now, but it's an act that will provide good quality funding and a continuum of care for Alzheimer's and other dementias. So yes, invite me and I'll show up.
Thank you, Tracy, for your wonderful presence and companionship. Most of us know you as a person of committed and profound prayer life. Have there been changes in your experience or practice of prayer that might be a gift to us?
Thank you, Bishop, for that question. My prayer life has become way more silent. The joke is I can now go on a silent retreat. I think a lot of my prayer is in silence. It's also in the body. My yoga studio has become a very important place of prayer for me. I'm swimming 3 or 4 times a week, and swimming my laps is a place of prayer for me. And yes, I still take heart and find nourishment in gathering with the faith community and singing the hymns and being a part of our rituals. But I've had a pretty good relationship with God all these years, and I just become more and more convinced that in God I live and move and have my being, and nothing will separate me from that, no matter what happens. So, yeah, it's changed a little bit. Thank you.
Reverend Lynn, thank you so much for your remarks. It's really an eye-opener. The question I would like to ask is the opposite of the first question that was put to you. And my question is, when I, as an individual, am dealing with someone that I perceive to be in the early stages of dementia, but that person is in denial, what suggestions can you make as to how to break through to that person to get them to accept their condition and perhaps do something about it?
Well, that's a great question. Some of the people in this room have known me as a pastor for a long time and know that I'm pretty direct with folks. I think that if somebody you loved was showing the signs of not being able to breathe very well, or showing the signs of a cardiac condition, or showing the signs of serious addiction, the loving thing to do is to say something. And I think we are so afraid of embarrassing somebody or overstepping the bounds that we don't say anything. And I think if somebody I loved was showing the signs of dementia, I would say, I'm really worrying about you. Have you talked to your doctor about this? And if not, I would encourage you to talk to your doctor about this. One of the things that I find in my speaking around the country and around the globe is it's like opening up Pandora's box. Is by naming it, it's naming that elephant in the room, and people are starting to kind of come out of the closet and whisper to me, hey, I've been worried about this. And the truth of Pandora's box is lots of bad things fly out of it, but also hope flies out of it. And so the hopeful and loving thing to do is to say, I really am worried about you. I have a website. It's just tracylynn.com, and I write a blog. And, one of the things you could do is invite that person to take a look at some of what I've been writing or saying, or other people like me. And if it's somebody really close to you, then offer to go to to see the doctor with them.
Thank you, Reverend Lynn, for your message. My father is also a clergy person who's dealing newly with dementia. And I know one of the things that he's talked about is feeling so isolated. And are you aware of, and you may have partially answered my question with the last answer about your vlog, are you aware of networks or resources both for people with dementia who can network with one another, and also for family members and other support people to better understand the disease and how we can all speak with one another, make it less isolated?
Thank you for asking that question. Absolutely. The Alzheimer's Association has fabulous support groups for both people living with dementia and for our spouses and families, care partners, children, parents. The Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration also has support groups. We have a Facebook group, and we have a weekly Zoom group for those who want to participate. And I think it's really important to participate in those support groups, even if you just go to the Facebook page and you sort of look. You have to sort of say, I have it. But yeah, and I think, doctors might debate me on this, but I think we're going to see a lot more dementia in our generation and a lot less in future generations to come. And so I think those support groups are going to become more and more prevalent and more important. But you can't walk this journey by yourself. I have to tell you, the most painful thing is, I think back on it now, was my mom's inability to say it out loud, and my resistance and my brother's resistance when my beloved community of Judson said it's time for her to be in a memory unit. We didn't want to deal with it. We didn't want to see it. And I think if we had been able as a family to talk about it earlier, it would have been, her quality of life would have been so much better. And I would have learned so much from her. So we've got to be talking about it. Support groups, yeah.
Hey, Tracy. Would you talk about Emily, about the role that your spouse plays and the learning that goes on in your marriage as this has unfolded, as this journey has progressed? Thanks,
Dan. Sure. Emily's got a new job title. It's called Chief Logistics Officer. She is in charge of the logistics of our life. She has to figure out how to get us where we're going, and she has to cue me a lot. And I don't know how I would do this alone, frankly. And you know, I think it's really hard for care partners. In fact, the Alzheimer's Association talks about this pretty directly, that care partners provide billions of dollars of unpaid care for their loved ones, and they often become so stressed that sometimes they even die before the person with dementia dies, because they're still managing a family and a home and jobs and in the case of FTD, which affects those of us in our middle years, raising children. So Emily has always been, for nearly 20 years, my best friend, but she is now my companion on this journey. She also is speaking everywhere we go. We now speak together. She one day said to me, "I'm tired of being your roadie. I have something to say." And she's been saying it. Emily did not want to speak today, so I will say the one thing that she, as a care partner, hates is when people come up to her and they take her hand and look her in the eye and say, "How are you really?" So don't anybody do that today. But she does say that care partners appreciate folks reaching out to them, not about us, about them, and remembering their birthdays and taking them to lunch, or offering to stay. I'm not at this stage yet, but in the more advanced stages, to stay with me or somebody with dementia so they can have a life. So I hope, did I say enough, Emily? Okay.
Thank you, Reverend. As a City Club regular, I want to thank you for presenting one of the very best forums that I've ever heard. If this question is too personal, please feel free not to ask it. As a person of faith, has it been difficult for you to reconcile your faith with your diagnosis?
Thank you for asking that question. It's an important question. In fact, so important that a man by the name of John Swinton, a Scottish theologian, has written a whole book about it. It has not been hard for me with my faith. God did not give this to me. God didn't punish me with this. God didn't give it to me so that I could stand up here and talk. My God is a God who stands with me no matter what happens, and who will show me the way through no matter what happens. And so briefly, I will tell you that after my diagnosis, we had to get out of town for a while. We needed to get away. And we took a transatlantic cruise to Europe to be at the American Cathedral in Paris for Easter. And on that cruise for 4,000 nautical miles, I tried to come to terms with all of this. And as we were crossing through the Strait of Gibraltar, at crossing between the continents of Europe and of Africa, at midnight on Maundy Thursday, which for those of you who are not Christians, that's in the middle of the Holy Week between Palm Sunday and Easter, right at midnight, our boat started rocking and rolling, and something in me shifted. And I heard a voice inside of me that I've heard before say to me, you can deal with this and you can face this. And on Easter, when the preacher said, Christ is risen and we rise, which is our way of talking as Christians about new life, I felt myself rising. And again, I heard the God whom I know by many names and people come to through many paths say, I will walk with you through this from now until the end. I don't worry about being forgotten by God, and I'm not angry with God. But I know that that's hard for others, and that's part of why I'm trying to do the work that I'm doing.
We have a question from Twitter next. So you've mentioned a lot of things that you hope to see for the future of dementia in our stages of our lives. What is next on your list? What do you hope to accomplish, and is there a timeline to that?
Well, when I was, I'm glad you asked that question. I was down in Birmingham, Alabama, and we were leading a clergy conference, and we were speaking in a large church in Birmingham, and they were all excited because the congregations, the faith community of Birmingham, had come together to start a respite program, a day program for people living with dementia. And every congregation was taking a different day of the week. And it was a morning program, and it was about music and art and food and companionship, and everybody who went to it, whether you had dementia or not, you were considered a volunteer. And as I said to you, we are having to sell our home, our brand new 12 years left on tax abatement home with a permanent view of Lake Erie, permanently protected home, and an elevator. Anybody interested, speak to us. Anyway. We're moving back to the Heights because that's where my embedded memory is. I remember the stuff that happened a long time ago. I don't remember what happened 5 minutes ago. So we're moving back to the Heights, and we're moving down the street from a bunch of very interesting churches. And one of the things I want to explore doing is seeing that if in the Heights we could start this respite program, and I'd like to help get it started before I need it. And so that's one of my thoughts, and I'd like to see Benjamin Rose, and I'd like to see Judson, and I'd like to see McGregor partner with the congregations in the Heights to start this project. So I'm really glad that the rector of St. Paul's Episcopal Church down the street from me is here today. So you heard it now, Jeannie. And I also would really like to explore seeing if we can designate Cleveland as a dementia-friendly city, Greater Cleveland as a dementia-friendly community, because I think it would be, with our healthcare community here and our arts and our culture and our affordable cost of living, I think this could be yet a wonderful way to promote the city as a retirement community. So thank you for asking, whoever did. And that's my cue. I get to stop. God bless you all. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to a forum with the very Reverend Tracy Lind. Today's forum is part of our Local Heroes series sponsored by Citizens Bank and Dominion Energy. We're delighted to have Brittany O'Connor from Citizens Bank and Tracy Oliver and Ben Kreck from Dominion Energy with us today. Thank you for your support of City Club programming. The community partner for today's forum is the Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging. Additionally, we welcome guests from tables hosted by the Cleveland Clinic, the Episcopal Diocese of Ohio, In Council with Women, Judson Services, Luma Wealth Advisors, and St. Paul's Episcopal Church. We thank all of you for being here today. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Reverend Lind. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org. Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Global Community Radio, Channel 1, KAKU-LP Kahilui, KBOG-LP Bandon, KFZR-LP Fraser Park, KIEZ-LP Monroe, KLQS-LP Agua Dulce, KPDO Pescadero, Sunflower State Radio Extra Marysville, WLRI-LP Gap, WMUU-LP Madison, WRAQ-LP Angelica, WXDR-LP New Orleans, WXIR-LP Rochester.
Our census is not designed to control the people. Our census is designed to give the people power, to allocate resources. It's the people's census. That's our census. It's our Constitution. And it's at risk for political motivations, for lack of foresight, for lack of planning. Our census is being taken away from us. It's at the core of what this country is about. It's at the core of our democracy.
That's Arturo Vargas, and this is Alternative Radio. I'm David Barsamian. This edition of AR features Arturo Vargas on why the 2020 census matters. How important is the 2020 census? Very. Its repercussions are profound. It's about power and money. The census, in theory, should be neutral, an objective collection of data. But like almost everything else these days, it is politically charged. The numbers determine representation in Congress and allocation of federal funds. The Census Bureau is part of the Department of Commerce. Every 10 years, it is mandated by the Constitution to count, enumerate is the exact word used, the country's population. In the 2020 census, the Trump administration has added a question about citizenship. A concern is that the addition of such a question will discourage immigrants from filling out the form. The Constitution says nothing about a distinction between citizens and non-citizens. A court case in New York will soon rule on this critical issue. Our guest today is Arturo Vargas. He's a nationally recognized expert in Latino demographic trends, electoral participation, voting rights, redistricting, and the census. He serves as the Chief Executive Officer of NALEO, a national membership organization of Latino policymakers and their supporters. He has held various positions at the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and he was Senior Education Policy Analyst at the National Council of La Raza in Washington, D.C. He spoke in Denver at the History Colorado Center.
I got started working on the census in 1988. This is my fourth census. It's done every 10 years. Do the math. I'm old. And Denver was one of my first stops back in the late 80s when I was promoting the census, trying to get a full count of Latinos. I was working at MALDEF at the time, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. And then here we are in 2020. I've had a front row seat watching the Census Bureau plan for 2020. I'm a member, well, my organization is a member of the Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee on Racial, Ethnic, and Other Populations. And I've been on the Bureau's Advisory Committee since about 2000. So I've been a partner with them for the past 3 censuses, both being, a supporter, a partner, an advisor, and a pain in the neck. Trying to make sure they get it right. And we need to be pains in the neck with the Census Bureau. But they're friends. Census Bureau people, they're good people. They're nerds. They're demographers. They're researchers. They're scientists. They work at the Bureau because they believe in the mission of the organization, of that agency. And I can tell you, this census is the one I am most concerned about, given everything that has happened leading up to 2020. And we, as Americans, have a responsibility to save the census, because it is at the core of our democracy. I don't take for granted anymore that people know why we do a census, because we don't teach our history. And too many people don't know how this country was established and how we decided to govern ourselves. Y'all remember 13 colonies, right? Okay, I'll take that laughter as a yes. 13 colonies became 13 states. And they all had to decide how are they going to govern themselves with the federal government. And so there was a couple of compromises that were made. One was that every state would get senators. So you have 2 senators here, right? Bennett and Cory Gardner. And then you would get a member of Congress, members of Congress, according to how many people. So how do you determine that? You have to count the people. So that was the basis of the census. It's in the Constitution, Article 1 of the Constitution. But it wasn't always that way, that everybody got counted. Because when the census was established, and this is the part that sometimes we forget our history, that the census was born in the racism of the country. Because slaves, African-American slaves, the big compromise between the North and the South, because the North didn't want the slaves to be counted. Because they say, well, they're not people, they're property. And the South said, oh, no. You got to count our slaves because that's going to help us get members of Congress. So the compromise was, okay, we'll count them as 3/5 of a person. Native Americans living on reservations, they weren't counted at all. That was corrected by the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment, and this is one of the takeaways, please, that I ask you to walk away with, what the Constitution says. Representatives, so members of Congress, shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state. Whole number of persons. It doesn't say the whole number of whites. It doesn't say the whole number of men. It doesn't say the whole number of property owners. It doesn't say the whole number of adults. It doesn't say the whole number of voters. And it certainly doesn't say the whole number of citizens. It says the whole number of persons. This is the only thing that the federal government does in which all of us are truly equal. We can be a transgender, homeless teenager or a multimillionaire, a child that was just born, or someone who's 99 years old. Each of them counts as one, if they're counted. This is a civil rights issue. This is a core to our democracy. This is how we apportion political representation. So the numbers are used to distribute members of Congress, protection of civil rights. The reason we collect racial and ethnic data in the census is that the only way to show if policies are having a disproportionate impact on a certain racial group is that we have data to show that. In housing, in voting rights, in employment. It's core to the protection of civil rights. Billions of dollars get appropriated every single year. The federal government sends billions of dollars to the 50 states, our tax dollars, coming back to us according to how many people are in our states and communities. And then policymakers and all of you make decisions looking at numbers. So know that all of our decisions have been flawed because there has never been an accurate census. And we got to do something about that. Okay, here's just a geographic representation of distribution of members of Congress. This is what the United States looked like after the 1950 census. New York already was holding on to 43 congressional seats. California's catching up with 30. And there's Colorado with 4 members of Congress after the 1950 census. And this is after the 2010 census. See, Colorado now has 7 members of Congress. You see the red and pink states? Those are all states that lost members of Congress because their population either shrank or didn't grow as fast as the states in blue. And there's one red state in the South, that's Louisiana. It lost a congressional seat. Anybody want to guess why? Hurricane Katrina. There was massive demographic displacement after Katrina. People left Louisiana. Many of them moved to Texas. And you know what? With that went a congressional seat from Louisiana to Texas. That's why Texas picked up, that's part of the reason why Texas picked up 4 congressional seats after the last reapportionment. So you see, California held on to 53. New York and Florida now are on par with each other with 27. And chances are that New York is going to lose 1 or 2 seats after 2020, and Florida may probably pick those up. So Florida is going to probably be the 3rd most populous state after this next census if everybody gets counted. And here's an example of what are the programs that actually use census data to distribute funds, using decennial census in the formulas to determine how much money should go to each state. And it's for everything. It's for everything. It's for health care, for Medicaid. It's for SNAP, Supplemental Assistance Program, for, to feed children and families. Highway construction, Section 8 housing vouchers, transportation programs, Head Start. All the programs that you care about, because many of them are designed to serve vulnerable communities, depend on census data. And the irony is that it's the vulnerable communities who often don't get counted. So, again, we need to do something about make sure we have an accurate and safe census. But it affects everybody. I mean, if you want to build more highways, you got to count everybody. One of the issues that we've been very concerned about at NALEO is the undercount of Latinos overall. Latinos, the Census Bureau will tell us that in 2010, 1.5% of Latinos weren't counted. They say something called net undercount. And when you talk to the Census Bureau, they'll probably talk about net undercount. Net undercount does not represent the number of people missed. The word omissions, when the Census Bureau talks about omissions, that's people missed. So there were actually 2 million very young children, ages 0 to 4, omitted from the 2010 census. How do we know that? Dr. William O'Hare, the foremost demographer in the country today on data on children, he's an advisor of the Census Bureau. He works for the Annie Casey Foundation. He did something called demographic analysis, where he took the 2010 census data set and compared it to actual births, actual deaths, and actual migration records. And he accounted for undocumented migration as well. So using hard data, he compared the 2010 census. And when he was done, he was missing 2 million children ages 0 to 4. The net undercount, because there were some children ages 0 to 4 who were counted twice, but not the same ones who were missed. So the net undercount of children was 1 million. He called me when he was done with this analysis because he thought NALEO would be interested in knowing that of those 1 million children missed, 400,000 were Latino children. We'll never have an accurate count of Latinos if we don't count our babies. These are children ages 0 to 4. Okay, the 2020 census is a year and a half away. If children 0 to 4 are at risk of being missed, these children started being born 2 years ago. Think about it. We know where they are. They're in our hospitals. They're in our prenatal programs, in our early childhood programs, in our Head Start programs. We know where they are, and they're going to be missed again in 2020 if we don't do something about it. And that's a 7.1% undercount rate for Latinos compared to 4.3%. Other populations that are severely undercounted include African Americans, poor people, immigrants, Native Americans, renters, immigrants. All these vulnerable populations don't get counted as well as other populations. All right, so one takeaway, power, right? Political representation, money. That's what the census is about. It's about power and money. And at its core, it's about who deserves it, who has it, who gets to keep it, and who gets it. So don't think that the census is just this really nerdy activity that happens every 10 years and, somebody walking around with a clipboard checking off names and counting people. This is at the core of some real heavy stuff, power and money. So it's always been a controversial issue and at the core of our Constitution. Okay, so 2020 census, here we go. It's 2 years away. So for the past 10 years, and it takes that long to plan a census for the Bureau. In fact, already the Bureau has a committee that's organizing the 2030 census. And I'm part of an advisory group that is trying to set up how do we do 2030 in a very different way. I won't be around to do it, believe me. I'm going to be retired by then. But I'll advise them today. So the 2020 census, the Bureau has been trying to completely redo the census in a way that would make it more cost efficient and more streamlined. And they've been doing some great thinking about how to make that happen. And they have had some major innovations that they are planning to do. Two things about that. One is there will be some innovations in the 2020 census. But number two, many of the ideas that the Bureau have been planning to do and what they were studying and doing research on, they are not going to be able to do. Because in the past year, the Department of Commerce and the White House have changed their plans, have imposed upon the Census Bureau a different agenda and a different operation. So now what the Bureau is going to do is carry out an operation in 2020 that it hasn't been planning for the past 10 years. Now, part of that is Congress's problem, or fault, because Congress, for the past 4 years, has not given the Census Bureau the resources it needed to ramp up for 2020. And as a consequence, the Bureau has had to delay, modify, or cancel basic elements of its preparations for 2020. So in some ways, it's going into the 2020 census blindly because it doesn't know exactly how everything's going to work because it hasn't had the opportunity to fully test everything. And that's because Congress hasn't funded the Bureau enough. Now this year, for FY19 that just started September 1, the Bureau is a little flush, but in our opinion, it doesn't have enough resources to catch up based on what it lost in the past 3 years. So it's ramping up. The biggest change for 2020 is that Bureau wants to make this a high-tech census, right? You've heard this. It wants everybody to respond online. Now, on the one hand, it makes sense because many of us do things online. Those of you looking at your laps, I know what you're doing. You're texting. We live online. So it sort of makes sense that we have the opportunity to complete our census forms online. So there's some promise there, but there's also some pearls. The danger being, one, we know people are scared about what's going to happen if you submit your personal information online. What are the Russians going to do with my census information? No, seriously. What are the Russians going to do with it? And there's a fear. Is it going to get hacked? I mean, the federal government has been hacked already a couple of times. So while it makes sense, we know that there's some dangers there. Administrative records. This is something that the Bureau doesn't talk much about, but we should know about what the Bureau is planning to do in terms of administrative records. Administrative records are IRS, Medicaid, Social Security, all these other databases that exist that the federal government maintains about us. Now, some people will say, why is the Census Bureau asking me all these questions? Because they already know everything about me. Why are they being so nosy and imposing upon my time when they could just go to X data set and get the information they need? Well, the fact is, the Bureau says, yeah, the public is right. The federal government does know everything about us. So how can the Census Bureau be smart and go to these other data sets to get information to complete some of the information that it doesn't get from us, from forms that are not returned or are returned incomplete? So the Bureau has been trying to study this and research this to determine which data sets it's going to use to complete the count when those of us who decide not to return our census forms or we return them incomplete aren't cooperating. But what the Bureau hasn't yet decided is exactly which data sets it's going to use and for which purposes. So we're keeping an eye on this because one of the things we're concerned about is we want to make sure they get it right. And some of these data sets are not complete. You know, by definition, if you're not authorized to work in this country, you shouldn't have a Social Security number, right? So you're not on the IRS data set. And we know that some of these data sets are not complete when it comes to recent births. And remember, it's our babies who are most likely to get missed. And some of these data sets don't collect information on race or ethnicity. The IRS doesn't care if you're black, white, Asian, Native American, or Latino. They just want your money, right? So we're keeping an eye on this. So we need to know what's going on. The Bureau was going to redesign the way it asked all of us what our ethnicity and race is. They had spent 10 years researching how to get into the psyche of the American public so that we understood what was being asked when the Bureau asked us, what is your ethnicity, what is your race? 10 years they spent researching this, and they had come up with a new way of doing it, and this administration put the kibosh on those plans with no explanation. And so now they're going to go forward a bit with an imperfect way of collecting race and ethnicity data. Reduction in the number of local census offices. All of these innovations that the Bureau has been doing has been because Congress told the Bureau in 2011 that the next time they do a census, they have to do it without spending a penny more than they spent in 2010 in $2010. That meant that the Bureau has had to figure out an operation that was going to cost $5 billion less to do. Well, because the Bureau didn't fund the Census Bureau, and because the Bureau has had to pause, delay, and cancel many programs, the fact is that this is now on track to be the most expensive census. Because, what is it? Pennies foolish, pound. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's what's happened. The Congress didn't give the resources to the Bureau enough to do this effective streamlined census. But because of high tech, because of the online process, the Bureau is shrinking the workforce that it's going to use for the 2020 census. And this is going to be something where all of us need to get involved. We need to help the Bureau find good people to work there. And it's going to be tough this year because of the historic low unemployment rate that we have in the country right now. There aren't that many unemployed people as compared to 2010. 2010 happened to the Great Recession. Very high unemployment rate. I mean, the Bureau was hiring PhDs to be enumerators. They had no problem having a highly skilled workforce. Already the Bureau is telling us that they can't find enough good people. So that's something we need to help the Bureau to do. In 2010, there was a census office in every single congressional district. So that meant that Colorado had at least 7 offices in 2010. As of November of last year, there were only 4 offices planned for Colorado. In Aurora, Colorado North, I don't know what that means. It may mean something to you, but it's in the memorandum that I copied. Colorado Springs and Denver. These are the offices for the 2020 census. You have a regional office here in Denver, in Lakewood, that's in charge of 12 states. But these are the 4 offices that are going to be in charge of counting Coloradans. So when the Census Bureau comes later today, let's ask them, are these offices opened? Who's managing them? What's the staffing plan for this? How many people are you going to hire? And where are you going to hire them? Rural communities are going to be particularly affected by the lack of money. Colorado has a lot of rural areas. Originally, the Bureau was planning to do something called Update Enumerate. Update Enumerate means that the Bureau is going to hire census enumerators to go into the rural areas of the country, confirm the addresses, and then enumerate people right then and there and count the people who live there. That was the plan. But because the Bureau has been starved and they needed to cut funding, they will do something called Update Leave. Update Leave means that they will hire enumerators, they will go update the address, and then leave behind a census package. And cross your fingers hoping that the people who live there are going to fill it out. That's the way rural communities are going to be counted in 2020. And this affects Colorado significantly because of your rural communities. Update Leave is the operation to count your rural communities. So when we do our outreach and we tell people it's time to get counted, if they're in rural communities, we need to tell them, look for that package that someone's going to leave behind on your doorstep, because that's your census form. Dress rehearsal. Anybody here in the arts? Any actors? Yeah? All right. When you do a dress rehearsal, it's as if it's the real thing, right? Just without the audience. You don't stop. You replicate everything exactly as if it's the real thing. And that's what the Census Bureau does every year ending in 8. This is the year ending in 8, 2018, in time for 2020. The Bureau had planned to do 3 dress rehearsals. Providence, Rhode Island, in the county in the state of Washington, and 2 counties in the state of West Virginia. So an urban area, a mixed area with a large Latino agricultural population in Washington state, and a rural area in West Virginia. But because of lack of funding, the Bureau had to cancel Washington and West Virginia and only did the dress rehearsal in Providence County, Rhode Island. And in fact, it didn't even call it a dress rehearsal. It called it an end-to-end test, because all that the Bureau had money to do was to see if the computers were going to work. There was no communications program. There was no advertising program. There was no partnership program. All the things you would think that would happen in a census didn't happen. So when I say that the Bureau is going into 2020 blindly, it's because it hasn't fully tested everything. Even the final test that just wrapped up in Providence County, Rhode Island, was not a complete dress rehearsal. Ban on hiring work-authorized non-U.S. citizens. This is something that's a little murky still. Census jobs are federal jobs. And if you're going to work for the federal government, you need to be a U.S. citizen, unless there's some kind of waiver where the federal government determines that we need your skills, and so we will waive the fact you're a non-citizen. In the past, the Census Bureau has gotten a waiver because there are some areas of the country where languages where there are not enough citizens who speak those languages. So they would hire work-authorized non-citizens, people with green cards, people who are here legally and authorized to work. The Bureau would be able to hire them so they can go into those neighborhoods where Spanish only is spoken, or Hmong, or Vietnamese, or Korean, or Farsi. They needed to hire those language skills. Census Bureau has been told, nope, only U.S. citizens can be hired. Now, I say it's murky because there's a loophole in the law that says the Census Bureau can hire non-citizens as translators. So now we're pushing the Bureau, this is part of being the pain in the neck, pushing the Bureau to say, okay, you need a lot of translators. So you better get this waiver, because there are some communities in the country where if you go in there and the enumerator only speaks English, they're not going to be able to get the information from those households. So this is something where we got to push the Bureau. So when the Bureau comes in, let's ask them, what's the plan for hiring a culturally and linguistically competent workforce? And then the census questionnaire itself has been radically changed. And you've heard about the citizenship question. I'll get into that. But I also want to talk about the race and ethnicity question.
You're listening to Arturo Vargas on Why the 2020 Census Matters. This is Independent Alternative Radio. You can order copies of this program by calling 1-800-444-1977. Again, that number is 1-800-444-1977. Or you can order online on our secure website, alternativeradio.org. That's alternativeradio.org.
As I mentioned, the Bureau had planned to radically change how it asked all of us what our race and ethnicity was. They were going to do a combined question. In essence, it was going to ask, what is this person? And then all the options were listed. White, Latino, African American. There were 9 Asian checkoff boxes. Native Hawaiian or Native Alaskan. Native American, Native Alaskan, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander. There was going to be a new category called MENA, Middle Eastern North African. And then there was the catch-all, some other race. People in the MENA community, the Middle East, people from Morocco and Egypt and the Sudan and Syria and the Arab countries, people who trace their heritage there for the past 30 years have been clamoring for the Census Bureau to give them a category. Because the Census Bureau says if you're from Egypt or Morocco or Saudi Arabia, you are racially white. And these people are like, no. We're not white. And the Bureau says, yes, you are. And so these people were not counted as being from that part of the country. So we work quite a bit with stakeholder organizations from these communities. And they would say, if you look at the data from Detroit, that has the largest concentration of people from the Middle East, you can't tell how many Middle Easterners are poor because they're in the white category. You can't tell how many are children, Middle Eastern children, or because they're in the white category. You can't disaggregate the data. So they have been clamoring for 30 years, and they got right to the finish line, and the rug was pulled out from under them when the Census Bureau decided there will be no MENA, not the Census Bureau, the Department of Commerce decided no MENA category. So this is what the Bureau is going to do in 2020. It's going to ask everybody, is this person of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? This is the question that's been on for many years. And there are 5 checkoff boxes. No, not Latino or Hispanic. Then you go to the next question. But if you are, like me, you can check off yes, Mexican, yes, Puerto Rican, yes, Cuban, or yes, other Latino. So if you're Guatemalan or Dominican or Hondureño or Argentinian, you have to write in that group. But only one. If you're both Mexican and Puerto Rican, you got to decide who you love more, your mother or your father. Because the Bureau says you can only check one box. So that's one problem with this question. Okay, so then you go to the next question. What is this person's race? So if you check no Latino, then you just go and you can check white, black, American Indian, or Alaska Native, some Asian, check off boxes, or some other race. The problem, especially for Latinos, is that after I check off Mexican and I go to the next question, what is my race? What are you talking about? I just told you what my race is. I told you I'm Mexican. And the Bureau says, no, being Latino is your ethnicity. Now tell me what your race is. And so as a consequence, about half of all Latinos in the country check off a box called some other race. The problem with that is that OMB, that has decided how many races are in the country, says there is no such thing as some other race. In fact, many Middle Easterners end up checking off the some other race box too. About 95% of the people who checked off some other race are Latinos because they checked off the Latino box. What the Bureau has to do is to go back and impute, using algorithms, a racial category for those some other race respondents. The Bureau wanted to get out of this business, but was prevented of being able to do so through, I believe, some political agenda. There are other issues we got to keep an eye on. There's no permanent director at the Census Bureau yet. Someone's been nominated. He hasn't yet. He did have a hearing, but hasn't had a vote. He probably won't get voted into either the lame duck session of this Congress or in the next Congress. So right on the eve of the census, will there be a permanent director? The GAO, the General Accounting Office, has designated this census a high-risk federal activity. Well, that's no surprise. It does it every 10 years, except this time around, it did it much earlier in the cycle because of all these innovations. Talked about the public trust and talked about the funding situation, all affecting this census. But the biggest threat now that you've all heard is that the Department of Commerce has ordered the Census Bureau to add a citizenship question to the decennial census. Now, what's the problem with this? The last time the Census Bureau asked everybody in the country, are you a citizen, was in 1950. After the 1950 census, the Bureau determined that it wasn't collecting accurate data about citizenship by asking the entire population, are you a citizen? So beginning in 1960, they asked the citizenship question on a sample survey. Those of you old-timers will remember short form versus long form. The citizenship question was on the long form. in 1960, 70, 80, and 2000. It was a long form because it asked a whole bunch of questions. After the 2000 census, the Census Bureau created something called the American Community Survey, where that sample survey goes to 3.5 million households every year. And this is, has anybody gotten this survey? I know I have. This is the survey where it asks everything about your household. Not just your name, your gender, your age, your ethnicity, and your race. They ask you how many hours do you commute, what's your level of education, what language do you speak, do you have running water, how many toilets do you have, are you a citizen? So it's one question of about 50, and it's on a sample. But now the Bureau wants to put, the Commerce Department is ordering the Bureau to put this on the decennial census without any testing of what the impact is going to be. And it's doing it in this current environment. We know that this is not a comfortable time for immigrants in the United States, right? We know what the government is telling us. I'm going to cancel DACA. I'm going to cancel temporary protected status. I'm going to change the rules on public charge. We're going to build a border wall. Are you a citizen? What is that going to do to our communities when they get that census form? I don't know necessarily the motivations for why this question has been added now. I had some pretty good guesses. I don't want to get into politics, so I won't. But this is now subject to litigation. There are 6 lawsuits pending in the country, 2 in New York, 2 in Maryland, and 2 in California, just challenging the citizenship question. That was a very important decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. The Secretary of Commerce himself said that he made the decisions, Wilbur Ross, and he said that he was responding to a request by the Department of Justice for more complete citizenship data so that the Department of Justice could enforce the Voting Rights Act. That's what he testified before Congress, and that's what he has told the public about why he decided to add a citizenship question. Well, in litigation, it has come out that, in fact, it was his idea all along. He's the one who asked the Department of Justice, hey, can you guys ask for this question? And so they did. And they didn't want to because they were busy with the Comey affair and dealing with other issues. But he got the Department of Justice to ask the question, and then he went through this bogus 3-month process of doing research